When Howard Carter cleared the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, the world stared at the gold, the mask, the throne, the treasure of a boy king sealed in darkness for over 3,000 years. But shoved into a side chamber, inside a plain, undecorated box, sat two tiny coffins almost no one wanted to look at. Inside them were two mummified baby girls. Not princesses with names, not daughters carved onto any temple wall. Two infants who never lived, wrapped and embalmed with the same care given to a pharaoh, and laid beside the young king for eternity. For nearly 100 years, one question sat unanswered above those two little boxes. Who was their mother? The records were silent. The walls said nothing. And the woman who should have been buried as Tutankhamun's queen had simply vanished. No tomb, no body, no trace. Then modern DNA was pulled from bones that should have surrendered nothing, and what it revealed about those two babies, about a damaged woman lying in a forgotten tomb nearby, and about a claim Egypt's most famous archaeologist made, and then never finished, is not the clean story you were taught in school. To understand why those two coffins matter so much, you have to understand the clean, comfortable story we were handed for almost a century. Tutankhamun was the golden boy king. He took the throne as a child, ruled for about a decade, died young, and was buried with unimaginable wealth. Egyptologists assumed he married his half-sister, a young woman named Ankhesenamun, and that the marriage simply ended without children when he died. The two infant mummies in his tomb were noticed, of course, but for decades they were filed away as a sad footnote, a curiosity nobody wanted to dwell on. The official line was reassuring, simple, and easy to put on a museum placard. And it should have been the end of it. It wasn't, because the moment scientists pointed modern technology at this family, the polished story didn't just crack. It collapsed into something darker than anyone running the tomb seemed willing to say out loud. The trouble starts with Tutankhamun himself. For years he was imagined as a healthy young ruler cut down by an accident or a murder. But when his mummy was examined with modern CT scanning and genetic testing, a very different boy appeared. He had a club foot that forced him to walk with a cane. Investigators found more than 100 walking sticks buried in his tomb, and now they understood why. He had a cleft in the roof of his mouth. His bones showed signs of a painful condition that was slowly killing the tissue in his foot. He carried the parasite for severe malaria in his blood. This was not a strong young god. This was a fragile, sick teenager who likely lived in constant pain. And the question every researcher kept circling back to was simple and uncomfortable. Why was a royal prince, raised with the best food and medicine in the ancient world, so broken from the inside? The answer was waiting in his blood. Between 2007 and 2010, a team led by Egypt's most famous archaeologist, Zahi Hawass, did something that had almost never been attempted on this scale. They extracted DNA from the royal mummies of this period and began comparing them, building a family tree from the inside out. To understand how this works, picture it like a fingerprint passed down through generations. Every person inherits matching genetic markers from their parents, and relatives share more of these markers the closer they are. Two strangers share very little. A parent and child share a clear, traceable pattern. And here is the detail that becomes important later. When two close relatives have a child together, that child inherits a doubled, overlapping signature, a genetic echo that practically shouts what happened. The team took samples from the densest, best protected parts of the bone, the places where ancient DNA can survive when everything else has rotted away. Then they read it, and the family tree that emerged was not a royal fairy tale. It was a warning. The first result was stunning. Tutankhamun's father was identified as the mummy from a tomb known only by its number, KV55, almost certainly the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten. And Akhenaten was no ordinary king. He had torn Egypt's ancient religion apart, banned the old gods, and forced his people to worship a single sun disk. He moved the entire capital into the desert and reshaped art so that the royal family was shown with strange, elongated bodies and swollen features. After he died, later pharaohs tried to erase him completely, smashing his monuments and scratching his name from the records, as if he had never existed. This was the bloodline Tutankhamun came from, a family that had already made itself the enemy of its own gods. His mother was a separate mummy, an unnamed woman found discarded in a side chamber and known to researchers simply as the younger lady. That alone would have been a major discovery, but it was what the DNA said about the relationship between these two parents that stopped everyone cold. Tutankhamun's mother and father were not just husband and wife, they were full brother and sister. The same mother, the same father. The golden boy king of Egypt was the child of a brother and a sister. Let that sink in for a moment. The most famous pharaoh in human history, the face that sells out museums and fills documentaries, was born from incest. And suddenly his broken body made perfect sense. When siblings have children, the harmful hidden flaws in a family's genes are far more likely to line up and express themselves. The club foot, the cleft palate, the weak immune system, the bone disease, all of it pointed back to a bloodline that had been folding in on itself for generations. The Egyptian royal family kept marrying within itself to keep the throne pure, to keep power locked inside one small circle. They believed they were protecting a divine bloodline. In reality, they were slowly poisoning it, and Tutankhamun was the result. But this is where the story turns from tragic to genuinely disturbing. Because Tutankhamun grew up and did the exact same thing his parents had done. He married his half-sister Ankhesenamun, a daughter of the same Amarna royal line. Two people already carrying a dangerously narrowed set of genes had children together, and those children are the two tiny mummies in the wooden box. The two stillborn girls Carter found and almost overlooked. The DNA testing confirmed what the side chamber had been hiding in plain sight. Both infants were the daughters of Tutankhamun, established with a probability above 99%. These were his children, and their small bodies tell their own painful story. One of the girls was born prematurely, at roughly 5 to 6 months. The other was carried much closer to full term. Neither survived. They were not buried as failures or thrown away. They were carefully mummified, fitted with tiny gilded masks, and placed in miniature coffins built in the same noble style used for adults. One mask did not even fit properly because it had been made for a different size entirely. A father who would never rule beside his own children chose to take them into the afterlife with him. When Tutankhamun died as a teenager, his direct bloodline died with him in those two boxes. So we have the babies, we have their father, we have the terrible pattern of a family marrying itself into extinction. But one question still hangs over everything, the same question that has haunted this tomb for 100 years. Where is the mother, where is the queen, who should have been buried as the wife of a pharaoh? And this is where mainstream Egyptology gets very quiet, because for decades nobody could find her. Ankhesenamun, the named wife of Tutankhamun, simply vanishes from history. And the way she vanishes only deepens the mystery. After Tutankhamun died, an ancient letter survives in which a widowed Egyptian queen, almost certainly her, did something no Egyptian queen had ever done. She wrote in desperation to the king of the Hittites, Egypt's great enemy, and begged him to send one of his sons to marry her, because she had no one left and refused to marry a servant. A prince was sent. He never reached her alive. He was killed on the way. And after that letter, Ankhesenamun disappears completely. No confirmed tomb. No confirmed body. One of the most important royal women of the age, the last of her line, gone without a trace. So when attention finally turned to a battered, half-forgotten tomb nearby, the stakes were enormous. The tomb is known only as KV-21, and inside it lay two anonymous women, two female mummies in terrible condition, their names lost, their bodies broken by time and ancient looting. For years they were just two more unidentified royals among many. But when the same DNA project tested one of them, the mummy labeled KV-21A, the results pointed somewhere extraordinary. Her genetic markers suggested that she was the mother of the two babies in Tutankhamun's tomb, the mother of his children, which would make her his wife, which would almost certainly make her the missing queen herself, Ankhesenamun, found at last. It should have been the headline of the century, the lost wife of King Tut, recovered and identified. So why have most people never heard about it? Here is the uncomfortable truth, and it is the part that the documentaries tend to skip. The DNA from KV-21A was incomplete. The mummy was so degraded that scientists could only recover a partial profile, enough to strongly suggest she was the mother of those infants, but not enough to prove it beyond doubt. The link is real, but it is not locked. And it gets murkier. The genetic web of this family is so tangled by generations of incest that the markers themselves become hard to read cleanly. When everyone in a family tree is also a cousin, a sibling, an aunt, the lines blur. The same inbreeding that destroyed Tutankhamun's body also corrupted the very evidence we now use to identify his family. The secret protects itself. And then comes the most modern twist of all, the one that turns a scientific mystery into something that feels almost deliberate. A few years ago, the same famous archaeologist who led the original testing announced to the world that one of these very mummies, one of the two women in KV-21, was in fact the lost queen Nefertiti. Not Ankhesenamun, Nefertiti, the most beautiful and famous queen in all of Egyptian history, whose own tomb and body have never been confirmed. It was a sensational claim, He promised that a full announcement, with proof, would follow within months. The world waited, and then nothing came. Months passed, then years. The promised confirmation never arrived. No paper, no definitive proof, no clear answer about which mummy is which, or who these women truly are. To this day, the identification has never been finalized. So look at what we are actually left with. 2 dead baby girls, confirmed by DNA to be the daughters of a king, a father who was himself the child of a brother and sister, a queen who should be the most important woman in that tomb but cannot be definitively named, a second woman beside her with no agreed identity at all, and a public claim that one of them is the legendary Nefertiti, dangled in front of the world and then left unproven for years. Each thread on its own is a loose end. Woven together, they look less like a gap in the record and more like a story someone is reluctant to finish telling. And that is what makes this so haunting. We picture ancient history as something solid, carved in stone and settled on a museum placard. The golden boy king, the beautiful queen, the clean family tree. But the truth buried in these tombs is darker and far more human. A dynasty so obsessed with keeping its blood pure that it married itself into sickness and finally into nothing. A teenage king crippled by the very thing meant to make him divine. 2 babies who never opened their eyes, carried into eternity by a father who had nothing else to leave behind. And somewhere in the Valley of the Kings, 2 damaged women still lie without their true names. The DNA inside them holds the answer. We just have not been able, or perhaps not been willing, to read all of it. Until someone does, the 2 tiny coffins in Tutankhamun's tomb will keep asking the same quiet question they have asked for 100 years. Who was their mother? And why is everyone still so afraid to say her name out loud? If this story pulled you in the way it pulled me in, hit that like button, subscribe for more secrets being dragged out of the ancient world by modern science, and tell me in the comments what you believe. Is the lost queen already found and simply unconfirmed, or is the truth still waiting in the dark of the Valley of the Kings? Until the next discovery,